What's up my friends, welcome back. You're watching Harv Video Audio Stuff, and have you ever wondered what the difference is between the different log filming modes that manufacturers give us? I was curious, so in this video I'm going to be taking a look at Sony, Canon and Fuji's log modes, and I just hope you find it entertaining. Roll that intro. So S-Log 2, C-Log, F-Log, I'm going to be saying log a lot in this video, but just to be clear, I'm not comparing anything to do with colour, detail or bitrate. I'm just going to be looking at the contrast curve and dynamic range. If you do enjoy this free content and you find it helpful, please consider hitting that subscribe button down there. It's just the best way to support the channel. Anyway, enough of this waffle, let's dive in. So this is Fuji F-Log, and I've exposed it so that the meter is reading 0. I don't have a huge amount of experience with exposing F-Log because I just don't use Fuji cameras on the whole, but to me this looks really clean. I can't see any noise whatsoever. This is the type of log that you can look at it and know that you're going to get a lovely looking grade once you're done with it. Anyway, as mentioned, this video is not about colour, so I'm going to mask around the top row so we can see what's happening with the contrast curve. When we look at the waveform, we can see that this is a very nice contrast curve. It does make me a little nervous as I'm primarily a Sony shooter, so this to me, just eyeballing it, looks a little dark. But this kind of reminds me a little bit of something like Arri's Log C. It's not too flat, not too contrasty. We can see our darkest point is just hovering around 20% and the lightest point is around 60. This tells me that you can overexpose a little bit and it should be fine. This is F-Log at +1 stops and it's still fine. The darker points are at 25 and the lighter points at 75. And then exposed at +2 stops, you can see the dark points are at around 35% and the lighter points are up at around 85%. So it's getting a little hot. I'd expect skin tones to be exposed at around 50–60% in this mode, which would probably still look lovely once you brought down the exposure in post. Next we have C-Log, and of course this is C-Log 1, not 2 or 3, which are known to have very different contrast curves, usually a lot more dynamic range. And the thing that jumps out to me straight away is just how saturated and fairly contrasty it looks. Again, I have to remind myself that this video has nothing to do with colour. So again, let's mask the top line and look at the waveform. Now this to me looks like a really dark exposure. I wouldn't feel completely comfortable shooting this way. Our darker area is around about 17% and our lighter area is up at around 60–62, something like that. So let's see what happens when we bring the exposure up now. Here we are at +1 stops and you can see that the brighter area is now up at 75% and the darker area has barely moved. It's sat at around just over 20%. Now at +2 stops you can see the brighter area is up at around 90% and the darker area is sat just over 25%. So with C-Log, the difference between the bright and dark areas actually increases as you bring your exposure up. By how much, I hear you ask? Well, exposed at 0, there's a 45% difference between the darkest square and the lightest square. At 1 stop over, there's a 55% difference. And at 2 stops over, there's a 63% difference. And to me, this suggests that when you're shooting C-Log and you underexpose, you could expect some mushy looking shadows. But if you overexpose, you might be dealing with too much contrast. So what about F-Log? Well, I found it to be a lot more stable. At 0 stops, there was a 43% difference. At +1 stop, there was a 47% difference. And at 2 stops, there was a 51% difference. So the contrast levels did increase, but very subtly. So now let's have a look at S-Log 2 and 3. Next we have S-Log 2, and I've only exposed it the one way, which is pretty brightly, because I've used S-Log 2 extensively. I'm very familiar with exposing it, and I know it needs lots of light. Just as a side note, all of these clips were shot at their camera's native ISOs. I know that's something that some of you will be wondering because it affects dynamic range. Now masking our top row again and looking at the waveform, this actually compares really well to F-Log when exposed +1 stops. Checking them out side by side, you can see there's some remarkable similarities. F-Log on the top and S-Log 2 on the bottom. You can see that if I bring the exposure of the S-Log 2 clip down in post just slightly, they match very closely. I have to admit I wasn't expecting this. In my mind, I thought that Fuji would give me a slightly more contrasty log curve. Next we have S-Log 3 and I've exposed it pretty much the only way that you should, which is very brightly. Something I hope will change as soon as I get hold of the A7S III and can shoot in 10-bit. Looking at the top row and our waveforms, you can see that all squares are very bunched together. This is a real telltale sign that S-Log3 gives you tons of dynamic range. I actually really like shooting in S-Log3, however, it is just frustrating that it needs exposing so brightly. I'd even say unless you're using one of Sony's cameras that can give you 10-bit, just use S-Log2. So it's time to draw some conclusions from my quite unscientific testing. I'd say Canon have the least dynamic range and Sony S-Log3 obviously has the most. For me, S-Log2, S-Log3 and C-Log all need overexposing just a little bit to get the most out of the image. And on the flip side, I found Fuji F-Log to be really forgiving in the way that it needs exposing. I don't mean to disrespect Canon C-Log at all. Canon, as always, focus on great colour and really usable dynamic range rather than trying to cram all the data they can into a really flat gamma whilst using an 8-bit codec. And believe it or not, I think my favourite of these log curves may actually be Fuji F-Log. It's just such a nice image and so forgiving when it comes to exposure. If you're wondering about the difference in contrast levels with the two Sony log modes, well, S-Log2 was 49%, very F-Log-esque, and S-Log3 was a minuscule 35%, and exposed that brightly as well. So there you go. I just want to stress that this isn't one of those, this camera company is better than this other camera company kind of video. I personally really can't stand that kind of shiitake mushrooms. These log modes are just different, and I hope this video helped to reveal those differences, and I hope you enjoyed learning as I did. Anyway, that's it. As always, I've got a large back catalogue of videos about videography on this channel, of which YouTube has hand-picked this video for you, and the one below is my most recent upload. Until next time, let's help each other out and shoot better video. See you guys.